Among Hollywood's galaxy of comedic stars, few burn with such targeted and individual genius as Steve Martin. From the beginning of his career, Martin stood out not only for being humorous, but for being methodical in the manner in which he created humor. He was, and still is, a comedic craftsman. While others fed on improvisation and disorder, Martin crafted his jokes like a master watchmaker creates a timepiece. Each hesitation, each movement, each painstakingly selected word counted. His humor was not cobbled together, it was constructed. As one of his longtime partners observed, Steve doesn't just tell jokes, he engineers them. If this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started. This fastidiousness served Martin as one of America's most resilient comedic voices, taking him from the wild and crazy guy of the 1970s to his subsequent development as a refined actor, writer, and even renowned musician. But this perfectionism came at a price. It pitted Martin against performers whose style of comedy or professionalism conflicted with his own closely calibrated approach. While some performers badmouth openly, Martin seldom spoke badly of anybody publicly. He liked discretion, yet where discretion was not observed, he picked up on everything. His recall for poor conduct was almost photographic, and people who were rude to fellow workers or interrupted his workflow tended to find themselves surreptitiously shut out from his circle. Over the decades, certain entertainers reportedly earned Martin's private disapproval. Their styles, egos, or disregard for professionalism made them, in his eyes, destructive forces within comedy. Tonight, we explore 9 such figures, 9 actors Steve Martin allegedly viewed as actually evil in the sense of undermining the collaborative spirit he valued so deeply. 1. Chevy Chase, the ego that devoured the set. The feud between Steve Martin and Chevy Chase allegedly started during filming on Three Amigos in 1986. On paper, it had all the makings of a fantasy. 3 of comedy's biggest stars, Martin Chase and Martin Short, teaming up in a wacky western. But in reality, the shoot was anything but harmonious, according to crew members. Steve would come in every day dressed to work. One source remembered he'd know every line, every rhythm, and he was ready to cooperate. Chevy would come in with his own stuff, sometimes totally divergent from the script, and insist on changes that made him the star. Chase supposedly rewrote lines to get the most laughs, frequently at the cost of his fellow actors, and dealt with crew workers in a condescendence that unnerved Martin. To Martin, who felt that comedy was all about bringing everybody up in a scene, this was inexcusable. He once joked to director John Landis, if ego was money, Chevy could buy Wall Street. Though the 2 men maintained a professional demeanor in press appearances, Martin never collaborated with Chase again. Afterwards, he privately referred to him as a comedy genius with no soul behind it, an extremely unusual and condemning judgment from someone generally so restrained. 2. Jim Carrey, the human hurricane. While Chase battled Martin over ego, Jim Carrey battled him over philosophy. Carrey's improvisational manic energy was in sharp contrast to Martin's tightly timed delivery. The 2 have been said to butt heads at a mid-1990s awards show when Carrey's acceptance speech went off the rails and Martin, who was up next to present an award, materialized with a wrap-it-up sign. What Martin had meant as a light-hearted tease, Carrey is said to have taken personally. Jim took it personally, one guest said. The entire temperature in the room changed. Offstage, Martin referred to working with Carrey as doing calculus in a blender. Martin admired Carrey's ability, but grew tired of his constant desire to control the scenes. To Martin, comedy was a dialogue. Carrey made it a monologue. Over time, Martin turned down projects that would have teamed them up, feeling their styles were just not compatible. Behind his back, he allegedly referred to Carrey as an attention vampire, an individual who sucked up all the oxygen in a scene. 3. Bette Midler, the spotlight stealer. Martin's reported conflict with Bette Midler was during the charity gala they co-hosted back in the early 1990s. Martin had collaborated with writers to produce a staged evening with a balance of comedy and fundraising. But Midler, to everyone's surprise, broke out into an impromptu musical number that destroyed the entire rhythm of the event. To Martin, the issue wasn't her skill, he admired her greatly, but the lack of regard for teamwork. She did not work together. A producer testified. She devoured the event for her own ends. Although he never publicly disparaged Midler, Martin allegedly departed the event prematurely, leaving a donation accompanied by a note that read, "Tell Bet it was from her biggest fan." Silence. He never worked with her again. 4. Bill Murray, the unpredictable element. Bill Murray's reputation as a brilliant but chaotic performer is legendary. For Steve Martin, that chaos was poison. According to insiders, their tension began during a live television appearance in the 1980s when Murray showed up late, ignored the rehearsed material, and mocked Martin mid-performance. For Martin, this was not spontaneity, it was sabotage. Martin felt that Murray dishonored the group effort of all parties involved. Bill approaches comedy as warfare. Martin purportedly said, "He'll destroy trust to make people laugh." The experience was so disturbing that Martin reportedly did not speak to Murray for almost a decade. 5. Robin Williams, the improvisational whirlwind. Few comedians represented sheer, unedited creativity, such as Robin Williams. His improv was dazzling, but to Martin, it was also disorienting. On a combined TV appearance in the early 1990s, Williams constantly cut into Martin's carefully scripted material with rapid-fire riffs. It was like attempting to read poetry on a roller coaster. Martin afterward said he admired Williams greatly, but their approaches were just not compatible. For Martin, Williams' genius with no form teetered on creative sabotage. For that reason, he politely turned down projects that could have put them together, even though they liked each other. 6. Goldie Hawn, the schedule disruptor. On the set of House Sitter 1992, Martin and Goldie Hawn were said to have butted heads over professionalism. Martin, who held a strict schedule as a sign of respect, was infuriated by Hawn's supposed tendency to show up late to set. She also tended to improvise lines regularly, disrupting the flow of scenes Martin had carefully rehearsed. The last straw, in one version, occurred when Hawn made a sarcastic comment about Martin's banjo playing a beloved personal interest of his. Though their on-screen romance was undeniable, Martin spurned future chances to work with her, privately calling her a passive-aggressive performer who used charm as cover for ego. 7. Charles Grodin, the deadpan disaster. Steve Martin never worked extensively with Charles Grodin, but is said to have developed a strong opinion after seeing Grodin's aggressive style on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. Grodin's deadpan aggression usually left Carson visibly uncomfortable, and Martin, who admired Carson, found it painful to behold. To him, Grodin's performance went too far, bringing actual discomfort in the name of comedy. Martin later called it weaponized awkwardness. Although he recognized Grodin's skill, he viewed this kind of humor as on the edge of cruelty, something Martin had no interest in participating in. 8. Don Rickles, the roast that went too far. Don Rickles became infamous for his cutting insult comedy, but at a roast in the 1980s, Martin has said he thought Rickles crossed the line into cruelty. Jabs about Martin's divorce and lack of money struck too close to home. Martin endured the set graciously, yet in private, he found the experience profoundly wounding. For him, humor was to be derived from empathy, not from manipulation of real pain. He quietly stayed away from Rickles after that, feeling insult humor too commonly used cruelty under the guise of entertainment. 9. Burt Reynolds, the prank war escalator. Finally, there was Burt Reynolds, whose love of pranks and physical humor tended to undermine Martin's careful planning during concurrent Tonight Show engagements. Reynolds would spray shaving cream, dump water, or otherwise sabotage segments Martin had carefully prepared. Steve thought it was funny at first, said a stagehand, but then it just became draining. Martin allegedly requested never to be booked with Reynolds again. He once called him a 12-year-old with a death wish, funny in flashes, but ultimately annihilating of serious performance. The larger pattern, what all 9 of these individuals, Chevy Chase, Jim Carrey, Bette Midler, Bill Murray, Robin Williams, Goldie Hawn, Charles Grodin, Don Rickles, and Burt Reynolds have in common is not that they were terrible people or unskilled. Far from it. Each is renowned individually. But to Steve Martin, they symbolized something toxic to the cooperative ethos he held dear more than anything else. Martin viewed comedy as architecture, not chaos. It took planning, form, and respect for others. Those who undermined that form, via ego, formless improvisation, cruelty, or lack of professionalism, were, to his mind, evil. Not evil morally, perhaps, but evil to the art of comedy itself. And so, over decades of work, Steve Martin sat back and quietly cultivated his entourage. He worked with repeaters who shared his sensibility, actors such as Martin Short, Diane Keaton, and Carl Reiner again and again, while keeping aloof those whose energies conflicted with his own. As one old friend described him, Steve remembers everything. He never disses people publicly. But if you cross certain boundaries, disrespect, ego, cruelty, you just won't be invited back. That's his way of defending the art form he loves. Ultimately, Steve Martin's legacy could be not just the greatness of his comedy, but the integrity with which he pursued it. In a business so driven by ego and madness, he represented something else. Precision, dignity, and the notion that comedy at its finest unites people instead of dividing them.